Okay, so stage one, this is most of the world was in stage one before the Industrial Revolution. And today, not a single country is in stage one. So there are no more countries that are there. This was more connected to like foraging societies, right? This is like really like pre-industrial. And after that, you don't have this anymore because industrialization changes everything. So even countries today that are still developing, they have still already developed beyond this stage. So nobody's really here anymore. And so basically what happens in stage one, though, is that you have really high birth rates and really high death rates. So the population is not going to increase that much, right? So it's going to stay pretty steady because you have about the same number of people dying as you do being born. And so if the population changes at all, it's because of like war or famine, but it's not going to change all that much. It's going to stay like pretty steady. Okay, so in terms of like a case study for this, like we don't have one because there is no country that is in this stage now. But it's kind of crazy though that it's like not that long ago. Almost all countries were in stage one before the 1700s, and now we have none. I mean, that's a lot of change in not that long of time. Like I know the 1700s feels like forever ago, but relatively it's not, right? Are the stages always going to stay the same? So yeah, I mean, as far as we know, I mean, maybe there'll be, obviously now we have stage 5 and maybe there's a stage 6 and a stage 7, and we don't even know that far into the future because we don't know how our population is going to be affected. And so, I mean, it could change a little bit, but this is kind of how things are. All right, stage 2. So going forward into the graph, in stage 2, this is kind of, there's a lot going on here. So in stage 2, this is where a lot of developing countries are today. So when you think of like third world countries, so we don't really talk about third world versus like first world, second world anymore. Those terms were more specific about the Cold War, but we talk about as developing countries. So most developing countries are in stage 2. They've got high birth rates, right? But there is better medicine, right? These countries do have industrialized, features. They do have better medicine. So that will lower the death rate. So you can see the death rate is the first to fall. And here is where it's falling a lot. It falls really fast. More people will survive, especially children. More children will survive. So because now you have a super high birth rate and a much lower death rate, now you have the total population will increase really quickly, right? So this is the fastest population growth stage of any of them. Like the population will increase the most here. And so some examples of countries where this exists are states in sub-Saharan Africa, right? So that's underneath the Saharan desert. You've got like other places, Guatemala, Palestine, Yemen, Afghanistan. I'm going to look specifically at Afghanistan for a second. So Afghanistan actually has one of the highest rates of child mortality in the world. So like 1 out of 10 children in Afghanistan don't live past the age of 5, which is pretty intense, right? And so even though the death rate has decreased overall, it's relatively high for children, which means that you also will have higher birth rates because, if your children are not surviving, you have more children. And so another reason why the birth rates are high is really related to poor healthcare and limited access to education. So the more opportunities that women have, the more freedoms that women have, the more education that women have, the less likely they are to have a lot of children. So birth rates are very much connected to women's equality. In Afghanistan, women don't have a lot of access to these, contraceptives or education or different opportunities. And so the birth rate remains really high. The death rate has decreased, and it's mostly because of medicine. So even though Afghanistan has been in wars, a lot of wars for the last several decades, they still have decreased the death rate because of medicine. And so in a country that's in stage 2, their population is increasing really fast. And that's not always a good thing, right? So typically countries in stage 2 also don't have a lot of infrastructure and the means to really support all of those people. And so what you have is, rapidly growing population that can't sustain itself. And so if this continues, by 2039, the population of Afghanistan will double because of this. And so the trick for Afghanistan now is to decrease the birth rate, and that will help curb that. Okay, so stage 3. So in stage 3, what you have in stage 3 is, economic status is better in countries that are in stage 3. So remember, for a country in stage 2, the way to get out of that stage is to decrease the birth rate. And so the ways to do that is to have better, a better economy, more access to education, more access to contraceptives. So because of that, in stage 3, this is when you can see the yellow line now is decreasing. So the death rate, right, it's declining a bit, but it's not declining as much. It's kind of leveling off, and that's because they still have access to medicine, and even better medicine. Then the birth rate will just totally fall because of opportunities, right? That's like the key. Like if you remember one thing from the DTM, it's like the birth rate and opportunities and education and medicine are all connected. And so in a country in stage 3, you still have a population that's growing because you still have more people being born than are dying, but it's not growing as quickly, right? This is a much steeper cliff than this one. It's still growing, but not as fast. So it's leveling off a bit. Some of the countries that would be in this stage would be like Botswana, Colombia, India. I got a bunch listed on the bottom. South Africa, Mexico, and the UAE would be involved in here. And then remember, this doesn't include migration. So some of these countries have a lot of migrants coming in or out. And so that can affect the population growth. But this is talking about just natural increase. So let's focus on Morocco really quick. Morocco is a country that gained its independence in the 20th century. And since they did that, they've had like relatively stable politics, society, economy. And so because things stabilized and they were able to, grow, and they don't have a lot of violence, so they do have, education opportunities. Women, the actual fertility rate has decreased. So it's around like 2.7 now in Morocco. And that's huge. And so that's exactly what you need to be in this point. Life expectancy has even increased. So just since 1980, life expectancy in Morocco has increased by 20 years. That's insane. That's just like a crazy stat. So you can see here, that's in stage 3, things are kind of leveling off. The biggest difference for stage 3 is education. The biggest difference for stage 2 is medicine. All right, stage 4. So most developed countries today that have a lot of education, that have healthcare, that have opportunities for women, most developed countries are in stage 4. So these countries, the birth rate and the death rates have really stabilized over time, right? So you can see that you still have a birth rate that's falling, but for the most part, it's stabilizing. The population growth itself is also, becoming relatively stable. It's still growing a bit, but it's stabilizing. So the countries that are in this one are ones that I think, you'd expect to like be together, right? So you've got Argentina, Australia, Canada, China, United States, Brazil. All of these countries are in stage 4. And so a quick little case study on Argentina. I actually was reading a little bit about Argentina today, just because it's very interesting. So Argentina went from, they industrialized like fairly early compared to other like South American societies because of their like colonial history. And so after they industrialized, cities grew really fast in Argentina. A lot of people moved to the cities. Cities tend to have lower fertility rates than rural areas. Some of that is just based on opportunities, right? You have more education. So all those things we talked about what lowers fertility rates are all true in cities. And the other thing is you just have less space, right? So you don't, people live in smaller homes. And so that is like part of the reason why Argentina was able to get to stage 4, but now they kind of went through those earlier stages faster because they urbanized so quickly. And so another thing with Argentina is that the total population is still increasing because the birth rate is still a bit higher than the death rate, but it's leveled off a bit. And then the last thing is that, and I was trying to read more about this, but I just learned this today, that gender discrimination was outlawed in Argentina in 1869 as part of their civil codes. Kind of interesting, I don't know, fun fact. And so because of that, women in Argentina were able to access more education, more rights, more opportunities, more contraceptives, and therefore fertility rates were lower. And so Argentina was able to get to stage 4. And it's kind of an outlier in South America because of these factors. So that would be a case study for stage 4. So the last one is stage 5. And there's a question mark because stage 5 doesn't truly exist yet. Like, we're not really sure. We don't have any countries we have countries that would fit the model for stage 5. But we don't really have too much data surrounding this. And this will just take time, right? We just need more time, more data to see what happens. You can kind of see like these question marks at the end because we just don't know like where those lines will head. We can guess, we can make predictions, but we don't know yet. And so stage 5 means that the fertility rates are lower than 2. And that the elderly population is going to grow faster than the young population. So, for example, if you have, you can see here, less people are being born than are dying, right? So you have the population more people are dying than are being born. So the population is actually decreasing. So you can see what's happening to this line here. So some of the countries in Eastern Europe, Japan is another one that is experiencing this. And I'm going to talk a little about Germany. Germany their death rates have actually been higher than their birth rates since 1972. The only difference with Germany, and this isn't shown in the DTM, is that their population actually isn't declining because of migration, because a lot of people have moved to Germany in the last several decades. And so because of that, their population has not declined, and I think has actually increased. And so it doesn't totally fit that. But in terms of like, an actual country being in stage 5, that would be a good example. Another one is Japan. So Japan, let's see. Yeah. So Japan, there are some interesting articles about schools in Japan, especially in rural areas where there just aren't a lot of kids. Like, you literally have, elementary schools in different parts of Japan, in rural Japan especially, that have like 6 kids in the whole school. So you have more elderly people that live in that area than you have children. And so it just poses like totally different problems, right? Like, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, it's not that it's just like better for a country to be like, it's not like the higher the stage, the better off you are. It depends on like how you're analyzing it. Okay, so let's see. All right, so we got some questions. What is infant mortality rate? Infant mortality rate is the number of children that don't live past, I'm not sure what the exact age is, but it's like the number of children that die before they're of age, maybe age 5. Are contraceptives a positive or negative thing for a population? So contraceptives will decrease the birth rates, right? And so the problem with a society that birth rates are too high is that what we talked about last week with population pyramids is that if you don't have enough people in that society that can like work, if you have more people who are young and who are old than who are economically active, that's a problem, right? That's called like dependency ratio. And so in order to keep that balanced, you need to curb the birth rates. And so contraceptives in that sense are a good thing, right? So it also in general allows women to have more rights and to have more opportunities. So contraceptives are a positive thing. What stage would China be in? Since their population is affected heavily by things such as the one-child policy, for sure. Let's see. I think that China is in stage 4. And I think the reason why they have that's like the fact that they have their birth rates have fallen so much are like they did it, right? So like you can yeah, exactly, antinatalists. So for a country to like have their birth rate fall, it can happen because of gender equality or like the country itself like implemented laws. And so China is an example of that with one child policy, which is now creating other issues where you have a gender imbalance, right? Because China has emphasized male children. If you only have one, it's better to have a male. And so now there's too many men. All right. What is the dependent? So the dependency ratio is the number of like dependents that rely on people who are working. So dependents are ages, 0 to 18, 15, and then the older generation as well. So the young and the old depend on all the people in the middle to work and to provide for them. And so if you have more people that are young and old, that makes it really difficult in that society. All right. So stage 5 has question marks because we just don't know a lot about it, right? It's like relatively new in terms of when we have, of like the countries that we say are in stage 5 are like very recently in stage 5. So it's not like we have a lot of data to really show this. And that's important there, right?